There are people who speak with confidence, fluent in philosophy, quoting scriptures, weaving complex arguments with ease. They sound convincing, sophisticated, wise. But if you listen long enough, you begin to sense something missing. Their words echo like borrowed voices from books. They speak about truth, but truth doesn't speak through them. Then you meet someone else. They don't say much. But the way they look at you, quiet, grounded, shakes something deep inside. You feel exposed, not because they're trying to prove anything, but because they've seen. Not from knowledge, but from presence. You see, there's a difference between knowing and seeing. Knowing comes from memory, from books, from data. But seeing comes from silence, from presence, from something inside you waking up. True wisdom isn't measured by how much you can recite. It's measured by how deeply you live. In a world overflowing with information, that distinction becomes critical. Knowing is accumulation. Seeing is awakening. Knowing can be copied. Seeing cannot be transferred. Most people confuse one for the other. They believe that if they've read enough, listened enough, memorized enough, they've arrived. But real insight is not what you say. It's what lives behind your silence. And the truth is, everyone is living, thinking, and acting from a certain tier of intelligence. That tier shapes how you see, what you value, and what kind of life you create. In this journey, we will walk through 5 tiers of intelligence. Not to judge, not to categorize, but to help you locate where you are. To see what is real in you, and what's still borrowed. This is not a theory. It's not a hierarchy. It's a mirror. Let's begin with Tier 1. Borrowed intelligence. There is a type of intelligence that sounds brilliant, but echoes with hollowness. You've met them before. People who speak fluently about consciousness, quote sages with ease, and craft arguments so convincing that others begin to believe they must be enlightened. But there's something missing. It's not clarity. It's not articulation. It's embodiment. You see, borrowed wisdom is seductive. You read, you listen, you memorize, you accumulate sophisticated ideas, but nothing has touched your core. Nothing has cracked you open. The knowledge sits in your head, but your heart remains untouched. Your presence doesn't change the room. Your silence doesn't speak. You may know the right words to say when someone suffers, but they don't find peace in your presence, because all you're offering is information. Real intelligence, the kind that transforms people, never comes from memory. It comes from meeting life directly. You don't learn it from books. You burn for it. You bleed for it. You walk through storms with no umbrella. And you survive, not smarter, but quieter, and more dangerous. A man who has walked through the fire doesn't talk like a man who read about fire. Borrowed wisdom makes you clever. It gives you the illusion of depth. But when crisis comes, you fall apart, because the ideas you clung to are only scaffolding. They never became your bones. You quoted detachment, but you panic when someone leaves you. You preached about the ego, but you defend your opinions like they're sacred. You spoke of love, but only offered it when you were being praised. This isn't hypocrisy. It's immaturity. It's the first stage of awakening, and most people get stuck here. They build their identity around borrowed light and call it truth. But the truth doesn't care what you call it. The truth will test you. It will take your philosophy and throw it into chaos. It will give you heartbreak and ask you to still believe in peace. It will starve you of certainty and ask you to act with courage. And only when the borrowed wisdom shatters do you realize it was never yours. So if you're in this stage, good. But don't stop here. Don't confuse fluency with clarity. Don't confuse knowing with being, because true wisdom is silent, and silence is earned. There comes a point when repeating what others say no longer satisfies you. You've read the books, you've watched the teachers, you've nodded at all the right moments, but deep down, something feels off. A small voice starts whispering, "You don't really know what you're talking about, do you?" And it's right. This is where the fire begins. This is where borrowed ideas start to feel like chains. You no longer want answers. You want truth. You no longer want someone else's insight. You want your own. This is the birth of self-inquiry. It's not pretty. It doesn't make you feel smarter. In fact, it ruins you. You start to doubt everything you once believed. You look at the teachings you revered and wonder, did I believe this because it's true, or because I was afraid to think for myself? You stop quoting others and start questioning yourself. You stop chasing the right perspective and start asking, whose voice is this in my head? My teachers, my cultures, my fear? And for the first time you realize how many of your so-called beliefs were adopted for comfort, not clarity. You believed because it made you feel safe. You followed because it gave you identity. You repeated because it gave you approval. Now you're alone in the dark, and none of that matters. No quote will save you here. No master's name will protect you. You are face to face with the machinery of your own mind. And it's ugly. You begin to see how your opinions serve your insecurities. You begin to notice how your morality shifts when you're scared. You begin to catch yourself using spirituality as a costume to avoid vulnerability. This is not weakness. This is honesty. And honesty, though painful, is sacred. Because once you start asking real questions, you burn. You burn through self-deception. You burn through arrogance. You burn through the fake certainty that made you feel superior. And what's left? Not enlightenment. Not yet. But something more precious. Sincerity. Sincerity is the soil in which truth can grow. Without it, you will forever recycle clever words with a hollow heart. But with it, even your silence becomes a temple. So I ask you, do you dare question what you've built your identity on? Do you dare doubt the very ideas that once saved you? Do you dare be wrong about everything you thought was right? Because only then, only when you are willing to lose all your borrowed armor, can something real begin to emerge from within. This is not a phase. This is the threshold. Most people turn back here. But if you stay, if you endure the fire of self-inquiry, you will discover a kind of strength no one can give you, and no one can take away. There's a difference between speaking from memory and speaking from experience. People can memorize profound quotes. They can articulate ancient philosophies. They can talk about compassion, detachment, and truth with elegance. But when life cracks them open, when reality doesn't match their theory, most of it collapses, because borrowed words don't hold up under pressure. What holds up is what you've lived. Lived wisdom doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come from winning debates. It comes from bleeding quietly, from standing alone in your darkest hour and not running, from losing everything you thought you needed and finding that you're still here. You don't scream that you've learned something. It seeps into you. It softens you. It humbles you. You don't speak to be right anymore. You speak because the silence asked you to. There is a kind of strength that doesn't need to convince, a depth that doesn't need to explain. People feel it in your presence, even if they can't name it. It's not the strength of knowing more. It's the strength of carrying what you've seen. People who live from this place rarely speak of themselves, not because they're hiding, but because they know their life isn't a trophy. It's a scar, a gift, a fire that shaped them. Their words don't aim to impress. They aim to cut through illusion, and that's why they're dangerous. Because they won't tell you what you want to hear. They'll say, I've been where you are. I know what it looks like, and you're lying to yourself. Not out of judgment, but out of recognition. Not to wound you, but to wake you. There's no performance in this level of wisdom. No costume, no spiritual vocabulary to impress a crowd. Just a quiet clarity that can walk into any room and see through the noise. And when someone like that speaks, you listen. Not because they're loud, but because something in you goes still. This is the weight of lived wisdom. It's not an achievement. It's not a badge. It's not something you put on your website. It's a burden and a blessing. It demands that you live with integrity when no one is watching, that you face yourself when it would be easier to distract, that you choose truth over comfort again and again. So if you ever meet someone who lives from this place, don't ask them how they got there. Just sit with them. Let the silence speak. And one day, if your own fire has burned long enough, you'll carry the same weight, and you won't need to say a word. You've seen people argue with force. They don't speak to explore truth, they speak to defend a position. Their words may sound wise, but behind them is a trembling need to be seen, to be right, to be someone. That's the voice of ego. But there's another kind of voice, rarer, quieter, sharper. It speaks when it must, and when it does, it cuts like still water. No anger, no persuasion, no agenda, just clarity. Egoless clarity doesn't need to win. It doesn't need you to agree. It doesn't need applause, because it comes from a place where there's no you to feed. This is the shift from knowing for self to seeing through self. At this level, truth is no longer a possession, it's a presence. It isn't something you collect, protect, or quote. It flows through you because you're not standing in the way anymore. When you no longer need to prove your worth, you become dangerous in the best way. You stop manipulating, you stop performing, you stop trying to fix people or guide them or save them just to validate your role. You simply exist in alignment with what is. That's why egoless clarity is so unsettling. It doesn't fight, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't chase. It simply reflects, like a mirror that shows you exactly who you are, without distortion, without kindness, without cruelty. Just precision. And most people don't want precision. They want comfort. They want encouragement. They want to feel safe in their illusions. So when someone with egoless clarity speaks, they're often misunderstood, labeled cold, arrogant, even cruel, because they won't participate in your drama. They won't hold your hand as you sink into your story. They'll stand on the shore, clear-eyed, and say, you can drop that story, or not, but the suffering is yours to maintain. This is not detachment, this is presence, without entanglement. A mind not shaped by fear, a heart not held hostage by identity. When you reach this level, silence becomes your native language. You don't interrupt, you don't rush, you don't explain unless clarity is needed. Because you know, clarity doesn't come from words. It comes from a space within you that sees without distortion. And from that space, every word is a blade. Not to wound, but to reveal. You don't talk about love, you embody it. You don't preach detachment, you are unshaken. You don't teach humility, you vanish from the center. This is egoless clarity. It's not an idea. It's not a style. It's the precision that arises when there's no one left to protect. There is a point where even clarity must dissolve, where the blade of insight no longer slices, not because there's nothing left to cut, but because cutting itself becomes noise. This is where words fall silent. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because everything that could be said has become a veil. You begin to see truth doesn't need a messenger. Presence doesn't need permission. Reality doesn't need interpretation. It is. And the more you try to speak it, the further you drift from it. This is the paradox of the wordless flame. It illuminates everything, but cannot be grasped. It warms you, but offers nothing to hold. When you dwell here, you no longer seek confirmation. You no longer measure yourself in realizations. You no longer ask if you are awake. You just are. Not as a self, not as a knower, not as a witness, but as awareness. Without center, without boundary. Thoughts may still come, but they don't stick. They don't name. They don't claim. You no longer need to make sense of anything, because sense itself is a cage. You no longer chase meaning, because meaning was just the ego's compass in a world it never understood. Now, even the compass is gone, and you are not lost, you are unbound. This is not detachment, it is intimacy at a level language cannot enter. You are not separate from anything, not because you've merged with the world, but because the illusion of being a thing has fallen away. The hand no longer holds, the eye no longer seeks, the heart no longer yearns. Everything just is, and you are not other than it. When people ask, what is enlightenment? What happens after awakening? You see the game behind the question. And so you smile. You may answer, you may not. But inside there is no movement. No one trying to be helpful. No one trying to be silent. No one trying to be anything. Just the flame, wordless, unshakable, undeniably real. And from that flame, a single breath, a glance, a presence can awaken worlds. Not because it was designed to do so, but because when all effort falls away, truth flows where it's needed. Not through intention, but through stillness. There comes a point on the path where the path itself disappears, where all the books you've read, all the teachers you've followed, all the practices you've repeated, dissolve into smoke, because the one who saw it is no longer here. Not dead in the dramatic sense, not extinguished like a candle, but seen through, unmasked. You realize there never was a seeker. Only a seeking, fueled by tension, by lack, by a story. It was never about arriving. It was about maintaining the search. Because searching gave you identity. You wore the robes of a wanderer. You carried the weight of becoming. You asked the universe for light, never noticing you were holding a torch. And now suddenly there's nothing to hold. No path, no arrival, no one left to arrive. This is terrifying if you're still clinging. But if you let go, if you truly let go. Not out of defeat, not out of exhaustion, but out of clarity. A different stillness emerges. One that doesn't wait, one that doesn't measure, one that doesn't even name itself as stillness. It just is. You begin to see how much of your life was architecture. A carefully constructed temple of ideas and beliefs, built to house the one you thought you were becoming. But that temple was empty, and it always had been. Not in a sad way. In the most liberating way imaginable, because now you no longer need to sit at the feet of masters. You no longer need to chase states or visions. You no longer need to find yourself because the self was the veil. There is no goal anymore, no salvation to wait for, no perfection to pursue. There is just this, and this is enough. When the seeker dies, everything ordinary becomes sacred. The way wind moves through leaves, the sound of water against stone, the weight of your own breath in the morning light. You're no longer looking for signs, you're no longer decoding the cosmos, you're no longer asking what's next, because this is next, and this is forever. The search ends, not in triumph, not in cosmic fireworks, but in a silence so deep it swallows the question. And in that silence, you are finally home. When the seeker dies, something unexpected happens. You don't become enlightened. You become real. No more pretending. No more adjusting your voice to sound wise. No more nodding as if you understand some cosmic truth. You simply live, without costume, without performance. Because most of what we call spiritual is just theater. People playing roles, quoting scriptures, meditating with closed eyes but restless minds, afraid to be seen for who they are, human, messy, uncertain. But when the mask drops, there is nothing left to protect. You're no longer interested in being right. No longer trying to impress with mystical vocabulary. You're no longer polishing an identity labeled awake. You start speaking plainly. You eat when you're hungry. You laugh, cry, and say, I don't know, without shame. This is the paradox. The more you awaken, the less special you feel. The more you know, the less you need to say. And the freer you become, the more ordinary your life appears. That's the great secret. Truth wears no crown. Awakening doesn't arrive on a golden chariot. It walks barefoot, it drinks tea, it forgets where it left the keys sometimes. You stop trying to fix yourself, because you see there's nothing wrong, and even your flaws, your quirks, your shadows, are part of this dance. They are not obstacles, they are not signs of spiritual failure, they are just waves in the ocean of being. Living without a mask is not about being flawless, it's about being honest. You stop saying, I'm fine, when you're not. You stop nodding to please the room, you stop pretending to care about things you don't. And in that rawness, people feel safe around you. Not because you have answers, but because you have no agenda. You become the kind of presence that doesn't pull or push, but simply is. Unmasked, uncomplicated, undeniably human, and somehow that becomes the most sacred thing of all. You've been told to seek, to chase wisdom, to climb spiritual ladders, to meditate harder, read deeper, surrender more completely. But what if that's the very thing in the way? What if the seeking itself, the thirst for some final awakening, is the last veil between you and reality? Because seeking always implies something's missing, something's out there, something's not yet here. But look around. Is there a moment in your life, any moment, when this was not present? Not the story of it, not the interpretation, but this, the bare, beating heart of now. Every time you seek, you step away from it. Every time you chase a future realization, you abandon the only place truth has ever lived, here. This is why most seekers stay seekers. They become addicted to the journey, they confuse movement for growth, they worship effort as progress. But awakening doesn't reward effort, it rewards intimacy. It happens in the instant you stop running, the instant you stop trying to be spiritual. The moment you stop trying to become and simply allow yourself to be. No fixing, no becoming, just the quiet thunder of presence. That's when the fog clears. Not because you achieved something, but because you stopped distracting yourself. Truth doesn't need to be found, it's what remains when the noise falls away. The end of seeking isn't a failure. It's not giving up. It's finally trusting what's always been whispering beneath your thoughts. You're already home. This doesn't mean passivity. It means lucidity. It means living with your eyes open, not in pursuit but in perception. You begin to see not what should be but what is, not how life must unfold but how it already is, perfectly, imperfectly unfolding. You begin to see through the eyes of the eternal, not because you attained some divine vision, but because you removed the filters that distorted what was already in front of you. So if you ask, when will I awaken? Look closely. That question comes from the very part of you that cannot awaken, the part that survives by seeking, by striving, by postponing your arrival. But the truth, you've never left. The end of seeking is not the end of the road, it's the end of the illusion that there ever was one, and from there, you begin to see. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of resistance. The world fears silence. It fills the air with noise, constant words, endless entertainment, a ceaseless hum of distractions. Why? Because silence is dangerous to the ego. It reveals too much, it exposes what words try to cover, it breaks illusions we've spent lifetimes defending. In silence, you can no longer hide behind knowledge. You can no longer pretend to be someone. There's no audience to impress, no doctrine to recite, no title to wear. It is only you, naked, unprotected, whole. And that is where real teaching begins. The greatest revelations come not from books or lectures, but from the moments you allow yourself to sit still with the trembling rawness of truth. When you stop explaining, you begin listening. When you stop performing, you begin seeing. Silence doesn't teach with words. It teaches with presence. It doesn't convince. It invites. It waits for you to get tired of your own voice, the voice that's been narrating your life endlessly, judging, measuring, interpreting. And when you finally get quiet enough, you hear something different, not a sound, but a knowing. Not a lesson, but a remembrance. That's the secret few understand. Silence isn't empty. It's full of everything that matters. Stillness is not inaction. It is total alignment. It is movement without friction, clarity without force, wisdom without ego. The sages of every age weren't just wise because of what they said, but because of what they didn't say. Their silence was a mirror. It reflected the listener back to themselves, and those who truly heard were never the same again. You want to awaken? Don't ask for more answers. Ask for a deeper silence. Because in that space, what needs to be known will find you. Not because you chased it, but because you became quiet enough for it to land. Let the silence teach you. Let it strip away what you're not. Let it show you the part of you that never needed fixing, the part that has always been enough. This is where the real learning begins. Not in noise, not in ideas, but in the sacred stillness that has always been waiting for you beneath the surface of every thought. You want to know the truth, not just understand it intellectually, but taste it, hold it, feel it breathe through your bones. But here's something few dare to tell you. You are the only barrier. The truth isn't hiding. It's not behind a locked door or inside an ancient scripture. It's right here, always has been. But you, yes, you, have built a wall of mirrors around yourself. You look into them, and what do you see? Images, ideas, roles, reactions. The successful one, the spiritual one, the broken one. You mistake reflections for reality. You think you're searching for truth, but what you're really searching for is a version of truth that doesn't threaten your identity. You want awakening without burning. You want freedom, but on your terms. Let me make it clear. Truth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't adapt to comfort. It destroys what isn't real. If you cling to your masks, your beliefs, your carefully constructed sense of self, you will never meet what is real. Because truth can only meet truth. And for that to happen, everything false in you must go. That's why awakening hurts. Not because truth is painful, but because the lie you thought was you begins to crumble. So the real question is not, how do I awaken? It's this. Are you willing to be nothing? To be no one? To stop performing? Even to yourself? That's where it begins. Not with effort, not with understanding, but with a pause, a breath, a crack in the mirror. And in that stillness, something ancient wakes up. Not a thought, not a philosophy, but a silent recognition. Something in you recognizes itself. You realize you've never been the one trying to awaken. You've only ever been the awareness watching it all unfold. And suddenly you're not chasing anymore. You're not seeking. You're simply here. Not perfect, not enlightened, but real. And that is the beginning of everything. You've been told to improve, to evolve, to climb some invisible ladder of self-perfection. But tell me, who is the one doing the climbing? Look closely. Behind every goal, every vision of the higher self, lurks a silent assumption. I am not enough as I am. That's the original wound, not failure, not ignorance, but this belief, subtle and poisonous, that you must become someone else in order to be worthy. And so, you chase becoming. You collect techniques, beliefs, habits. You visualize. You affirm. You meditate. Not to be still, but to become better. You study, not to understand, but to upgrade. You help others, not out of compassion, but to feel valuable. You're not healing. You're managing an identity crisis in slow motion. But what if I told you this? The one who wants to become better is the very one that must dissolve. You think progress will set you free, but it keeps you on a leash, forever striving, never arriving. You see, becoming is a trick of the mind, a spiritual disguise for insecurity. Because to become something, you first have to believe that you are currently lacking. And that belief is the prison. You want to transform? Then stop running, stop becoming. Instead, be. Be still. Be raw. Be brutally honest with what is. Not with who you want to be, but with the naked presence you already are beneath the stories. Because the truth is this: nothing real needs improvement. Presence doesn't evolve. Awareness doesn't become. It simply is. So the question isn't, how do I become awakened? But who is the one trying to awaken? If you dare to look into that, you won't become someone new. You'll remember what you've always been, before the mind began pretending. And in that remembrance, the war ends. Words are seductive. They give structure to the formless, shape to the unseen, meaning to the unknown. But language is a double-edged blade. The moment you name something, you reduce it. You divide what is whole into what is this and what is not. You say love, and now it's a concept. You say awakening, and now it's a pursuit. You say self, and now it's a cage. You've mistaken the finger for the moon, the map for the territory, the description for the experience. But no word can ever touch reality. No label can capture the essence of this moment. And yet most live trapped inside the symbols, arguing over names, fighting over definitions, defending ideas as if they were life itself. Tell me, when was the last time you met the world without a name in your head? When you didn't call it tree, but simply felt its silent presence? When you didn't say pain, but just allowed it to tremble through your body without commentary? Language was meant to serve you, but now it rules you. You speak to dominate, to convince, to appear wise. But true wisdom has no need to be spoken. In fact, it thrives in silence. There's a depth of knowing that no sentence can contain. A truth so alive, it vanishes the moment you try to speak it. That's why the wisest beings often said the least. And when they did speak, their words landed like thunder. Not because they were clever, but because they arose from emptiness. So if you truly want to see clearly, learn to pause between the words, to rest in the space before thought, to trust what you know without needing to explain it. Because real truth doesn't scream. It doesn't argue. It doesn't dress up in intellectual clothing. It just is. And you, without a story, without a name, you are that truth waiting patiently beneath the noise of your mind. Everyone wants to evolve, to grow, to become better, wiser, freer. It sounds noble. It looks impressive. It sells books, builds brands, and fills seminar halls. But let me ask you this: what exactly is evolving? The self? The I that wants to grow? Because here's the truth no one dares to tell you. You cannot evolve something that never truly existed. The ego feeds on the idea of progress. It loves the concept of transformation, not because it wants to die, but because it wants to survive in a more spiritual costume. You think you're getting closer to truth, but you're just reinforcing the illusion that there's somewhere to go. You chase experiences, you seek out higher states. You meditate, affirm, and visualize, always in pursuit of something else. You call it healing. You call it growth. But often it's just distraction, wrapped in spiritual terminology. True awakening is not about becoming better. It's about seeing what has always been true beneath the masks. It's not evolution. It's revelation. You don't become the light. You recognize that you were never anything else. You don't reach stillness. You realize that all your movement was running away from the stillness already here. Progress assumes a linear path, but truth is not linear. It's immediate, it's now, and it's brutal to the ego's fantasy of gradual arrival. So, if you're asking how far along you are, you're still in the dream. If you think you've achieved some level, you're still lost in levels. The real work? It's the unraveling. The undoing, the falling apart of everything you thought you needed to become. until all that's left is what's never left. No title, no journey, no self, just a still, spacious presence that never needed fixing. Only remembering. You've been seeking all your life. You might not call it that. You might call it ambition, healing, spirituality, enlightenment. But underneath every effort, every question, every goal, there's a subtle whisper. I am not enough yet. That whisper drives empires. It builds religions. It sustains endless industries that promise wholeness. Once you do more, fix more, become more. But what if the very act of seeking is what keeps you from seeing? The moment you seek, you postpone. You confirm that truth is elsewhere, and you are the one who must find it. This is the oldest illusion in existence, that fulfillment is in the future. That awakening is a destination. That peace is a result of effort. It's not. Truth has never been away from you. Not for a single moment. It's not hiding. It's just too simple to be grasped by the mind. Because the mind wants complexity. It wants process. It wants methods, paths, techniques, all of which reinforce the seeker. But truth is not for the seeker. Truth begins where seeking ends. When you finally grow tired of the chase, when you see that every spiritual concept was just another mask for the ego to hide behind, then something breaks. Not out of effort, but surrender. Not out of gaining more, but losing everything you thought you were. What remains is terrifying to the mind, because it cannot be known, it cannot be named, it cannot be claimed, and yet it is the only thing that has ever been real. So if you're still chasing experience, still trying to arrive, pause. Let everything stop. Let the seeking collapse. Let the seeker dissolve. What's left will not have a name, but it will have no fear. It will not be yours, because it was never separate to begin with. And in that you will finally understand. You were never looking for truth. Truth was waiting for you to stop looking. You've heard it before. Seek and you shall find. But what if seeking is the very thing keeping you lost? Most people believe they are on a path. They think life is a journey from ignorance to knowledge, from confusion to clarity. So they seek books, teachers, methods, anything that promises wisdom. But let's be brutally honest. Most seekers aren't looking for truth. They're looking for comfort dressed as truth. They don't want to be free. They want to feel better. They don't want to lose their illusions. They want their illusions to become less painful. And so they chase the next insight, the next breakthrough, the next teaching, believing that somewhere out there lies the final piece of the puzzle. But truth doesn't work that way. The more you chase it, the more it retreats. Because the moment you are seeking something, you are affirming that you lack it. And this belief, that you are incomplete, that something is missing, is the lie at the root of all seeking. You see, real understanding begins not when you accumulate more, but when you start to unlearn. When you no longer identify with the voice that says, if I read this, I'll be better. If I meditate more, I'll arrive. If I master this technique, I'll awaken. No, truth is not a destination. It's not waiting for you on top of a mountain, or hidden in an ancient text, or locked inside the words of some guru. Truth is presence, and presence is never in the future. It is here, now, but you can't see it while you're looking for it. That's the paradox. A seeker, by definition, is not at peace. They are searching, restless, needing, and the very restlessness they feel is the veil over the stillness they seek. That's why so many spend years, even lifetimes, seeking, and end up only further from what is real. Because the one who is seeking, that psychological identity, that voice in your head that says I need to find truth, is the thing that must die for truth to be seen. Let that sink in. The seeker must die. Not literally, but existentially. The mental structure that believes in attaining must collapse. Only then is there room for reality. And it's not dramatic, it's not fireworks or sudden miracles, it's silence. It's the quiet realization that nothing is missing, that the one who thought something was missing was never real to begin with. So ask yourself, are you truly seeking freedom? Or are you trying to decorate your prison? Are you ready to let go of your search? Not because you've given up, but because you've finally seen that the seeker was the illusion all along. This is not the kind of realization that comes from effort. It comes when effort collapses, when you sit in stillness, and all the strategies fall away, and all that's left is this moment, not to be understood, but to be surrendered to. Then you're no longer a seeker. You're no longer even a self in the way you once believed. You are just this. And in that, the seeking ends, the striving ends. And truth, no longer chased, begins to reveal itself. Words have power, but only if you don't see through them. They form the architecture of belief. They build temples, raise nations, start wars, and justify suffering. Every philosophy, every religion, every identity you cling to is constructed from words. And yet, words are shadows. They point, but they are never what they point to. You say truth, and the mind imagines something noble. You say freedom, and the mind pictures escape. But truth has no image. Freedom is not a concept. They are not what you think they are, because all thinking is separation. When you name something, you create distance. You turn the direct experience of life into an object. You step out of the river and start describing the water. But the moment you describe, you are no longer swimming. You are spectating. That's the danger of language. It seduces. It gives the illusion of understanding while keeping you safely on the surface. And that is what most people settle for. A well-crafted narrative instead of a raw encounter with reality. But reality doesn't care about your narrative. The more words you stack up, the further you drift from the silence underneath them. So why do we keep talking? Because silence threatens the ego. In silence, there's nothing to prove, no one to impress, no defense, no armor. In silence, the truth begins to surface, not because you understand it, but because there's nothing left in the way. A truly wise person speaks less, not more. Not because they lack words, but because they see the cost of using them carelessly. They know that most conversations are two egos trying to outmaneuver each other, trying to be right, trying to be seen. But when the self is no longer the center of your existence, you speak only when needed. And when you do, your words don't come from memory or performance. They come from stillness. Stillness doesn't need to be loud. It carries more weight than 1,000 clever arguments. You can feel it. When someone speaks from a place of silence, their words don't try to convince you. They reveal what's already true within you. And sometimes they don't speak at all, because they know the moment doesn't need another explanation. It needs presence. You begin to see that most words are reactions. Defensive, performative, habitual. But when those reactions fall away, when there is no need to fill the space, silence itself becomes the teacher. It teaches not through information, but through transmission. It's the space between the words where the real shift happens. So if you want to grow in wisdom, don't just study what wise people say, study what they don't say. Observe the space they hold, the way they listen, the way they don't rush to fill the void. That's where the truth lives. And that's what you've forgotten in a world addicted to noise. So pause, be still, let the noise settle, let the mind stop performing. And in that emptiness, you may find something more powerful than any word ever spoken. You may find the part of you that was never broken, never separate, never lacking, and it was here all along, waiting in the silence. It's not that people don't want to change, it's that they want to change without losing anything. They want transformation without sacrifice. They want freedom without detachment. They want to awaken, but keep their illusions. But truth does not negotiate. It doesn't meet you halfway. If you want to see clearly, you must be willing to give up what you've been using to blur your vision. That includes your beliefs, your roles, your story, even your need to become someone. That's why most people stay trapped. They build identities that become too expensive to question. They defend their limitations because they've tied their worth to them. They wear their pain like a badge, proof that they've suffered, that they deserve something. But pain is not proof of truth. And suffering is not the same as wisdom. You suffer because you are still resisting what is, still negotiating with life, still trying to manipulate the moment to fit your expectations. The truth is, you can't change anything until you stop trying to protect who you think you are. Real growth begins when you're no longer afraid to let the false self die. That's what ego doesn't want you to hear. It wants healing to be comfortable. It wants progress that doesn't disturb your image. But the truth is disturbing. It doesn't ask for permission. It burns down the house you built on lies. It brings you face to face with the very thing you've been running from, yourself. So what does real change require? It requires the death of what's familiar. It requires honesty so brutal that it breaks your self-image. It requires sitting in silence long enough to see the games you play to avoid yourself. But here's the paradox. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you start to remember you were never broken. When you stop chasing healing, you discover that presence itself is the medicine. When you stop seeking approval, you uncover the quiet dignity of simply being. Real transformation is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need applause. It's the quiet dropping away of all that you are not. So if you feel like you're not changing fast enough, if you feel stuck or unsure, don't look for new ideas. Look at what you're still clinging to, because change doesn't happen by addition. It happens by subtraction. Not by becoming more, but by being less controlled, less defensive, less identified. And when that weight is gone, what's left is not a new version of you. It's the part of you that was always there. The part that doesn't need improvement. The part that's already free. The greatest illusion of the spiritual path is that you are becoming something more. But evolution is not the accumulation of traits. It is not self-improvement. It is not upgrading your personality. It is remembering what you are beneath all of that. Everything you have added, the masks, the beliefs, the ambitions, the fears, they are not you. They are strategies. Responses to pain. Armor worn by a child who wanted to feel safe. But they became a costume you forgot you were wearing. And now you think growth means decorating that costume. You think awakening means accessorizing your ego with better habits. You think enlightenment means being a nicer version of your image. That's not evolution, that's disguise. The truth is, you don't become wise, you stop pretending. You don't become powerful, you stop giving your power away. You don't become whole, you stop believing you were ever incomplete. And this remembering isn't found in books. It's not in rituals or philosophies. It happens in the quiet, when you've had enough of pretending, when you're too tired to chase approval, when you no longer wish to perform. And in that exhaustion, you collapse into truth. It's not glamorous. There are no fireworks, no divine chorus announcing your awakening, just a simple stillness, an inner recognition that what you are was never lost. From that space, everything begins to shift. You no longer need to speak to be heard. You no longer need to fight to be strong. You no longer need to prove anything because truth proves itself. You remember that you are the awareness behind the roles. The stillness beneath the noise, the vastness untouched by your own narrative. This is not poetic. It is terrifying at first, because everything you thought you were must die. And yet, in that death, there is no loss, only freedom. Freedom from chasing, freedom from becoming, freedom from constantly editing yourself for the world. So no, you are not evolving into something new. You are dissolving into something ancient, something timeless, something that cannot be defined by mind or captured by language. And when all else falls away, when even the idea of you becomes too heavy, you remember, you have always been here, watching, waiting, still. You've followed this path through the 5 layers of intelligence. You've questioned, you've watched, you've let go. But now, I must tell you something most won't dare say. This journey never truly had a destination. You weren't walking toward some final prize. You weren't evolving into a higher self. You weren't becoming anything. You were shedding, peeling back illusions, unmasking the layers. Every layer of intelligence we explored, borrowed, reflective, embodied, egoless, and silent, was not something to own, but something to outgrow. Each was only ever a stage of unlearning, a refinement of awareness, a softening into simplicity. The final act is not an achievement. It's a disappearance, not of you as a person, but of everything you believed yourself to be. You stop trying to be right. You stop seeking depth. You stop trying to see. And in that stopping, something reveals itself. Something so simple, so ancient, so unshakable, that the entire journey feels like it was just a whisper guiding you home. At this final layer, there's no you left to recognize it. No applause, no title, no spiritual identity. Just the quiet recognition that you were never separate. You were the light seeing itself in everything. You were the mirror reflecting without effort. You were the truth behind every question. This is why the wisest ones are often the quietest. Not because they are hiding something sacred, but because they have nothing left to prove. They don't speak to convince. They don't teach to impress. They speak when the silence itself decides to take form. So I ask you now, one final time, will you keep chasing words, layers, identities? Or will you sit and finally listen? Not to me. To you, the version of you that has always known, always seen, always been, not the seeker, not the thinker, but the silent presence that never needed to move. That, my friend, is where true intelligence begins and ends.